I'm going to call Grant Robertson.
Mr Chair, and I'm quite sure we'll come back to my colleague, the Honourable Ruth Dyson, who has a number of important matters to raise under Part 2 of this bill. I want to raise two matters in this first call on this, both of which eventually find their way to Schedule 1, which we are considering under Part 2 of the bill, around the voting papers. But I want to first talk about how the voting papers will make it to electors or to voters in these referenda. Because, as other colleagues have mentioned, this is, as the government tells us, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I think that's challengeable in some ways, but if we just for a moment accept the government's rhetoric that we're talking about a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change the flag, surely we should be coming to the House to debate under Part 2 the use of the best way in which we could engage New Zealanders in this vote. And there's no doubt that, I have a personal view, which I doubt is shared by all of my colleagues, that this is actually the kind of referendum that 16 and 17-year-olds should be participating in, potentially, because I actually believe that we are talking about something with such long-lasting consequence that actually we should be looking at extending the franchise to the greatest number of people. That wasn't something picked up during the discussion, but when we actually look at the way in which ballot papers will be distributed, we have a sorry lack of imagination from the government in terms of how they will get material out, and in particular the fact that they are relying on two or three main ways of ballot papers returning. The first of those is obviously the postal vote. And Mr Chair, I think everyone in this House knows that postal services are declining, be it in terms of the number of days of delivery of postal services, be it the positioning of post boxes, both of which are declining. In my own electorate here, I'm currently in discussions with New Zealand Post about the loss of postal services in a number of parts of my community. And here we have, in Part 2, a piece of legislation that anchors itself on the postal service and getting things back through that way. But it's all right, because the government's got a solution. They've discovered a thing called the fax machine. And that is apparently going to be what will rescue this referenda from its possible low turnout. There is an enormous amount of time in Part 2 devoted to how the fax machine will be used to return ballot papers. I'm going to go out on a limb here, Mr Chair, and suggest that most organisations, people, places people who might want to return their ballot papers would go to don't have fax machines any longer. They actually don't have them. I know it's tragic. I know that this is the future. It comes as no surprise to me to learn that the Honourable Trevor Mallard is in possession of a fax machine. It sits very well alongside his fondue set and VHS recorder that he also has at his house. But most New Zealanders will find they will struggle to find the fax machine. That's right. Let's not go any further on, Mr Mallard, or I'll start talking about fondue sets and key parties in the 1970s, and we don't need that. So we have this here, in Part 2, the idea that the fax machine is the next best thing alongside the return of the ballot papers. Mr Chair, this is a sad indictment, and unfortunately will lead to the very problem that John O'Naylor accidentally revealed when he gave his speech earlier on, which is the government know they're heading towards a turnout of under 50% for this referendum. Because Mr Naylor stood up and said, and well, indeed, under 25, Dennis O'Rourke says, and that's quite possible as well, because John O'Naylor, a man with experience of poor turnouts in local body elections, stood up and told us that's what you get with these things. Well, that's not good enough, Mr Chair. That is not good enough for a referendum of this type. But as I said, Mr Chair, I want to move on to the question of the actual ballot papers themselves that will be released. And I want to ask a question of the Minister and the Chair to get absolutely clear. And that is the question of the randomisation of the ballot paper. In clause 13(4), we know that for the first referendum it says, Mr Chair.
Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. For the purposes of subsection 3, the Electoral Commission must arrange the alternative designs on the voting paper in random order. This is repeated for the second referendum in section 14, sub-clause 2. For the purposes of subsection 1, the Electoral Commission must arrange the two options on the voting paper in random order. What I want clarification from the Minister and the Chair is random order the same as a unique order on each ballot paper? So to explain, it is possible in Schedule 1, when we view the voting paper for the first flag referendum, to see the 4 options put out. Is what we're saying here in this bill that they will simply be not necessarily A, B, C and D, but D, B, C and A? Or will it be on each ballot paper that they will be uniquely random? And this is actually a very important point, Mr Chair, because there's a lot of international research that would tell you that the order in these situations is very important. In one British study, we're told that if you're first, you are twice as likely as the second one, second position on a ballot paper to be voted for. No, it didn't, Mr Mallard, and we'll make sure that gets in Hansard for you there. So that's good. But to have the 4 random is not actually enough. It needs to be uniquely random. But that is only the first issue that I have with this. And obviously in the second referendum, we've got 2 options, and similarly the question would be raised for that. What concerns me, Mr Chair, about the ballot paper for the first referendum contained in Schedule 1 is we run into that question that is, I mean, I think if anybody who's watching tonight can see this, they probably won't be able to, and they don't do close-ups on parliamentary TV. But you will see that in extremely small writing to the left of the options, it says, he looking over his glasses, write number brackets numbers here. I can already see the beginning of the problem. Sorry, page 39 of the bill. I can already see the beginning of problems here of attaching to options A, B, C and D numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4. Whether or not people will be able to sufficiently understand the question they have asked. So let's read the question they've asked. If the New Zealand flag changes, which flag would you prefer? The answer to that question under this ballot paper is 4 options that you have to prefer. Now, you don't have to put that in, obviously, but you will be presented with 4. The question's actually not what's then done. Now, if you're a person who thinks visually rather than somebody who thinks in terms of words, you are actually getting 2 different instructions. You're being asked which flag you prefer, a singular, and then you have 4 boxes that you're being asked to fill numbers in on. I think there's a risk that Mr O'Rourke's 25% turnout could turn into a 25% turnout and then half of them being spoiled or invalid because people have actually failed to understand exactly what it is they're being asked. This, of course, Mr Chair, brings us back to the very point of why we are doing the referenda in this order. Why we are having the conversation this way. Because New Zealanders are going to have a ballot paper placed in front of them. If they've got decent eyesight, they'll be able to work out that they have to write some numbers underneath the boxes, underneath the flags. But actually, they may well think they're answering a question which is, which flag would you prefer? I suspect there will be a great deal of ballot paper spoiling that goes on. There are instructions, of course, and I do need to point out, Mr Chair, that the ballot paper says that there will be instructions above. I think we all know from other electoral processes, it doesn't matter how many instructions you put on a ballot paper or above a ballot paper like this, people will continue to make mistakes. And unfortunately, I don't think the voting paper for the first referendum is clear in terms of what has been asked of New Zealanders. So, Mr Chair, on those 2 points on part 2, I would like a response from the Minister just to clarify for us whether or not there is going to be a unique random ballot paper. Each ballot paper will be uniquely random. If that is not the case, I think we have a significant problem. If it is the case, then he can at least provide some reassurance to us. But I also think it's time for our Minister to get on their feet and explain to us why they are locked with Mr Mallard somewhere in the 1970s, asking New Zealanders to fax their ballot papers back. That's right. Ruth Dyson takes offence on behalf of the 1970s, but I say, but I say that we are now in the 21st century. It is now time for us to have a modern election.
I call Dennis.